good morning. We're ready for our Heritage Studies lesson this week. And I think this is where you left off. So I'm not sure if you did the work text page that goes with it or not, but it doesn't matter because I don't have my teacher book yet. So we're going to do some reading and we're going to do some discussion, and my hair looks terrible and I'm very sorry about that. And we're gonna learn a little bit. We're gonna keep going. We're still in the same chapter where we're learning about leaders who need to be just and have a great fear of the Lord. Remember, we've been talking about that. Today we're actually going to learn a little bit about our government and how it works and how you could become president one day. So look in your book on page 16. I'm going to ask you a few questions from last week and see if you can remember them. Do you remember what the Constitution gave people the power to do? Remember, the Constitution laid out our government. What did it give the people the power to do? To elect their own leaders. That's what the Constitution gave us. Now, what must people be in order to elect rulers? Now, anybody can go out and vote, if you're of voting age, but what kinds of people need to be virtuous people. If we're not a virtuous people, that means we're not going to elect good leaders. How did God show His goodness to America during the people's time of unbelief? Do you remember? They had this great time of unbelief. They were starting to not believe the Bible anymore. Oh, it's just a book of fairy tales and yada, yada, yada. What was God's mercy that He showed? Remember, it was the Second Great Awakening. Remember that? What started the War of 1812? Do you remember? It had to do with the Indians. Remember, the French and the Indians had fought against the British on our soil here in America, and the French lost. And then Britain said, okay, you little Americans, pay up. You have to pay for the war. And we were like, no, I don't think so. Remember that? And they were also stopping our Navy. They wouldn't let us be our own country. They were stopping our Navy, and they were making our guys fight for them. And they were Americans. Remember that? So do you remember what the Americans and the British agreed to do to end the war? Remember, they signed a peace treaty. Remember that? But then there was a battle that went on after the peace treaty had been signed because news did not travel fast. Do you remember where that battle took place? The Battle of New Orleans. The Battle of New Orleans is where it took place. Do you remember which American general built those strong defenses and he defeated the British there at New Orleans? Do you remember his name? Andrew Jackson. How was Andrew Jackson unjust? Remember him? How was he unjust? Remember, they made that treaty not to take the lands away from the Indians, but he did. He started taking away all of their lands. I want you to look at page 16. Look at the very top where it says America Grows, Growth of Democracy. Okay, so this little section here, we're going to be talking about how America was growing, how our country, our government was expanding and it was working. Look at the next page on 18, underneath that map, growth of transportation and inventions. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And look at page 19 where it says growth of territory. This is how America was actually expanding. Very exciting. So there's 3 different sections we're going to talk about today. So let's look back at page 16. Now on page 16 there's a diagram kind of on the left hand side. At the very top it says president. At the bottom it says voters or people. You see that? Okay, now I want you to look at where it says voters and the people. Do you see the red arrows that come up? Okay, well, there's one that stops at, on the left-hand side, it stops at Electoral College, and then it keeps going to the president. Okay, what that means is when the people vote for president, the person who gets the most votes is not necessarily the winner. What we do is, in each of our states, all the 50 states, there are people called electors that are assigned, and when the voting comes in, these electors will give their vote based on what the people voted in that state. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's called the Electoral College because it's a group of people who are electors from all the different states, and they're the ones who watch the numbers come in. Oh, they're voting highly for this person or highly for this person, and they'll say, okay, well then all the electoral votes for the state of Texas are going to go to this candidate, and it might be 32 votes, it might be 52 votes, it might be 3 votes. However, really I think it depends on the size of the state and how many representatives are in each state, and that will tell you how many electoral votes that state has. I believe that's the way they base that on. But anyway, so when we vote for president, we don't directly vote for this president. We vote for our Electoral College representatives to vote for us, but they are sworn to vote for who the people vote for. Now look back down where it says voters and people. Now look at where it goes up to the right. See where it says state legislature, and it goes up. There's two that kind of go up like this, and it's state legislature, and it points to the House of Representatives and the Senate. Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. There are 3 parts to our government. There's the Senate. There's the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. The judicial branch, it kind of has the word judge in it. So judicial branch has to do with all the court systems in the United States. The executive branch has to do with the president and all of his cabinet members, they call them. And then the legislative branch, to legislate means to govern or make laws. So the legislative branch, what do you think they do? They make laws. But our government is set up in the Constitution to where if the legislative branch makes a law, the president has to sign it and put it they have to make the law go into effect. And then the Supreme Court, which is part of the judicial branch, interprets the law. If the president doesn't like the law, he can send it back to the legislative branch, and they'll have to work and fix it to where he likes it. And that's kind of how it works. That way, not one single branch has too much power. It's very important, and the founders of our country wanted it to be that way. So, we, as people, get to vote for those legislatures. Every state in the United States has 2 senators. The legislative branch is made up of 2 sections. It's called the House of Representatives and the Senate. And every state has 2 senators. So then how many senators are there? Did you say 100? Because there's 50 states, and all 50 states have 2 senators in the Senate. Okay, now in the House of Representatives, it depends on how many people live in your state. It determines how many representatives that you have. So if it's a big state with lots of people, you're probably going to have a lot of representatives. If it's a smaller state with fewer people, then you're going to have fewer representatives. So the House of Representatives and the Senate make up the legislative branch. If you put those 2 together, there's one name you can call that: Congress. Okay? But Congress is actually 2 things. It's the House of Representatives and the Senate. Put together, it's Congress. The whole thing is the legislative branch. They're an important branch. They're all important branches, but the legislative branch is important. Those people are put into office by the people, by us. When we vote for a senator, and we vote for a representative. We vote for those congressmen. So if you want good laws to be passed that honor God, then you should vote for those people who would do that. So that's important. All right, so let's look at page 16 where it says America grows, the growth of democracy. Now I'm going to read these 2 pages. Remember, you have to follow along with me. You don't have to say it. Just follow along in your mind on the words as I read, okay? And as I read, I want you to find out, why is a democracy not a perfect form of government? Andrew Jackson was able to get away with doing something unjust because he was popular. This shows that democracy, or rule by the people, is not a perfect form of government. The majority is not always right. A bad leader or ruler can cause the people to make unwise decisions. The American founders knew democracy had weaknesses, so they made the United States a republic. That's very important. Our country is a republic, our government, not a democracy. In a way, let's keep reading. The people had an important role. They chose their leaders for the House of Representatives, but the people didn't choose all their leaders directly. The state legislatures chose senators. The president chose the judges, and the Electoral College had a large part in choosing the president. This system was put to the test in 1824. 4 men ran for president. None of them won more than half the votes in the Electoral College. The Constitution has a plan when this happens. The House of Representatives elects the president. Jackson had won the most electoral votes, but the Speaker or leader of the House of Representatives was concerned about Jackson's disobedience of the law. The Speaker of the House thought John Quincy Adams would make a better president. The Speaker encouraged the representatives to elect Adams. John Quincy Adams became president instead of Andrew Jackson. Look at the next page. Jackson won the next election for president. The president is responsible to uphold the law, but President Jackson was willing to break the law. Worst of all, he broke treaties the United States had made with the Indian peoples. The Cherokees were the best known of these groups. They had their own constitution, written language, and towns. They never fought with the Americans after the Revolutionary War. Many of them had become Christians. But Jackson said he would not keep the treaties. He would not protect the Cherokees from people who came on their lands illegally. Jackson said the Cherokees should move to lands west of the Mississippi. Finally, the U.S. Army forced the Cherokees to move west. About 4,000 Cherokees died in that move that became known as the Trail of Tears. And there's a painting right there of what the Trail of Tears would have looked like. Jackson was not ruling justly or in the fear of God. Christian leaders spoke out against breaking the treaties. They said the United States should treat the Cherokees justly. Some missionaries were thrown into prison for defending the Cherokees. How terrible is that? Okay, so why is it that a democracy is not a perfect form of government? Because the majority is not always right, because a democracy goes by majority. Majority rules. However many votes for this, then it goes. But people are not always fair and just. That's right. So, since a democracy is not a good kind of a government, what did they make America? A republic. That's where we elect leaders to represent the people. The people don't just say, okay, this is what we want. We elect representatives. But it's important to make sure that we elect representatives and senators who are just, who are virtuous, who we know will make laws that uphold God's laws. So Andrew Jackson, he was a pretty bad dude, wasn't he? So what did he do that was so unjust? He was terribly unfair to the Cherokees. He lied. Oh, yeah, we'll do this treaty. And, oh, yeah, this. He wouldn't take anybody off their lands when they were trespassing. And the Cherokees didn't want any problems, but he wouldn't help them at all, even though he had promised that he would. Our government had promised that. So what happened to some of the Christian people who were defending the Cherokees? They got put in prison, didn't they? That's exactly right. That's called persecution. Let's look at page 17 one more time. What do we know about the Cherokees from this page? What do we know about them? They had something, their own something. They had their own constitution. They had their own written language. They had towns. They did not want to fight with the Americans. That's exactly right. But what happened after that? What was it that the Americans caused the Cherokees to have to do? Travel, leave their home and travel to this new land. And that traveling was called the Trail of Tears. It was extremely sad time for the Cherokees. Can you go ahead and look at page 18 and 19 for me? Okay, so I'm going to have you pause this, and I want you to read pages 18 and 19 silently to yourself. Okay, now as you're reading, I want you to find out about all the different kinds of inventions and all the growth that was happening and how the territory was expanding. So I'm going to ask you a few questions when you're finished, so go ahead and pause it. Did you finish reading? If you didn't, make sure you pause it and finish reading, okay? This was a very, very important section, wasn't it? Where did most Americans live now that the United States stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean? They lived east of the Mississippi, kind of where it started. But they were starting to move west a little bit. How was the United States growing? It was growing in lands, but it was also growing in ways of transportation, inventions, and things like that. Now, they were using canals. Do you know what a canal is? It's like a man-made waterway, like a highway made of water. That's a canal. And they took the they made this Erie Canal. It connected Albany, New York, on the Hudson River, with Lake Erie, and it was one of America's most famous canals. So I'm going to show you a little song about that here in just a few minutes. They were able to really transport goods in a very much quicker way once they made that canal. So on page 19, what were some other ways that America was growing? They had factories, lots of railroad tracks, lots of towns were popping up. What country owned land to the south and west in the United States? Do you remember what country? It was Mexico. Mexico owned a lot of land in that area. What did President Polk do that was wrong according to many of the Americans? He started a war with the Mexicans, didn't he? People didn't want that. They were sick and tired of war. If we lived during this time, I think I'd be sick and tired of war. What about you? Yes, I would. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put something on the screen for you. This is just a little song, a little ditty thing that I found, and it's about the Erie Canal. It takes just over a minute to watch it and listen to it. It has the words on it, okay? And I believe this came up, I'm not sure when this, the canal opened in 1825, and I think this song was written just after 1900. So the song, I mean, it had been there for 75 years before the song came in. But on this little cartoon image, you'll see how they did it. They had the canal, and this was before they had steamboats or engines or anything. They would put their mules on the land, and then they would tie ropes from the mule to the canals, and the mules would walk up the banks of the river, and it would pull the barge or the boat up the canal. That's what they did before they had engines, and that's what it shows on this thing. So anyway, you don't have an assignment today, but I do want you to watch this, okay?
I've got a mule, her name is Sal, 15 miles on the Erie Canal. She's a good old worker and a good old pal. 15 miles on the Erie Canal. We've hauled some barges in our day, filled with lumber, coal, and hay. And every inch of the way we know, from Albany down to Buffalo. Low bridge, everybody down. Low bridge, for we're coming to a town. And you'll always know your neighbor, you'll always know your pal, if you've ever navigated on the Erie Canal. If you've ever navigated on the Erie Canal.